The Denver Broncos are entering the final week of the NFL preseason, but it is very apparent that several offensive players, the wide receiver pecking order, seems set in stone. On top of that, position battles across the board seem to be won already. We'll tell you our thoughts on who we think won the center job, the wide receiver pecking order, and more on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks to all the everydayers and first listeners out there who make us your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com. And here's what you can expect on today's episode of the show. Coming off the heels of the announcement that Bo Nix will be named the starting quarterback for the Broncos for the 2024 NFL season, we want to know really what happened at practice, because that really was the biggest story of the day following Wednesday's practice. You get updates on the return of Devon Vele and a couple of other players who have popped up on the injury report. More importantly, is there clarity now on the Broncos defensive side of the ball? Several position battles, including inside linebacker, the safety position, and even cornerback depth. Plus, we get into the pecking order of the wide receiver room, and the running back rotation seems solidified, while one player in particular looks like he has locked up the starting job at center for Bo Nix this upcoming season. You get all that on today's episode of Locked On Broncos, which is also brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Sayre, let's dive into it. Really, the biggest position battle we were waiting to see unfold throughout the season was answered on Wednesday. Bo Nix named the starting quarterback here for the Denver Broncos. We had an immediate reaction to that over there here on the show. So if you missed that episode, if you're an everydayer, make sure you go check that out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. But now that that one's out of the way, we can look at the offensive side of the ball and say, okay, hey, what are some other position battles that now have a little bit more clarity in terms of who's the starter? What's the rotation going to look like? I feel like we have a little bit of a good idea as we enter the final week of the NFL preseason.
Yeah, we got a glimpse maybe of that in that second preseason week, right, against the Green Bay Packers, when Luke Wattenberg was out there at the center position with Bo Nix starting the game. And I think that gave us kind of our first glimpse. It wasn't the full first team offense out there, because I know Ben Powers didn't play and a couple of other guys, but you got that battery right there, right? The center and quarterback battery, that is. And it wasn't what everybody expected going into the offseason, because there was a lot of talk about Alex Forsyth, the former Oregon teammate of Bo Nix, who snapped to him in college. He was in competition for that starting center position, but it does appear as though Luke Wattenberg, and Sean Payton noted this, so everybody that's listening has to understand, as he was talking about Bo Nix being named the starter, right? He said, I'm not going to answer any other questions about other position battles that are going on today. We're just talking about the quarterback. So it wasn't explicitly stated by Sean, but I think you can kind of tell with the way the reps have been divided out, with the way that things have been going in the preseason games. It just feels like that center position is solidified, with Luke Wattenberg now joining the starting five, replacing the departed Lloyd Cushenberry in free agency.
Yeah, all signs seem to point that way. I can tell you from Wednesday's practice, it was still the same with Luke getting the first team reps there with Bo Nix, who had gotten the first team reps during Wednesday's practice prior to the announcement coming there from Sean Payton. And look, I think the thing about Luke is, if you would have asked me a year ago that, hey, in 2024, Luke Wattenberg would be the Broncos starting center, I'd be like, wait, no, that can't be the case, right? Based on what we've seen. I mean, initially as a rookie, got thrown in at offensive tackle, kind of got thrown into the Wolves, struggled. We saw him actually have a little bit more comfortability and success at guard. And then now he's moved to the center position. And look, he's played all these positions before at the college level, but it seems like this is the one area where he's sticking. And to be honest with you, I feel like he could have played guard for Denver if need be, but Denver locked up. They got Ben Powers for several years. They also have Quinn Miners, who's now locked up. So there is no need for Luke Wattenberg to play at those positions. But it also, I think, gives them flexibility. Now, while he wins the starting center job more than likely, all signs point to it being his here. If something were to happen, if there was an injury, let's say to any of the guards there, I feel like Sean Payton could easily say, okay, hey, we're going to put Luke You're going to slide over here to the guard position. We're going to put Alex at center. I mean, Denver still has options here. And it's not that Alex Forsythe didn't do enough to do it. I just don't think he's ready just yet, right? And there's nothing wrong with that because look where Luke is at now compared to when he was drafted and when he came in. He's taken a couple of years to develop, and he looks like an entirely different player right now. He's got a lot of confidence, and now I think he's going to be the starter. And I think one thing we absolutely need to dive into here, Sayre, kind of baffles me a little bit in a sense, with the wide receiver pecking order, the rotation there, at least based on what we're seeing in preseason and training camp and some of the practices, it does seem like Courtland Sutton, Tim Patrick, Josh Reynolds. Those seem like an 11 personnel. Those are the three guys, which that is a fun trio. I'm excited about that. But it makes us ask the question, where is Marvin Mims in this situation? Like, we didn't see Marvin play really at all with the starters. We haven't seen him. He's had some struggles at practice. And it's not like I think we've weighed in our heads, is Sean Payton trying to hide Marvin Mims? I don't know if that's the case. That to me now is the biggest mystery here of the wide receiver pecking order. We have the three names already solidified. Where Marvin fits in, I have no idea.
I don't know either. I'm very interested by that because we also haven't seen him return kicks or punts in the preseason. We know he can do that, obviously, but in terms of the offense, we don't know exactly what he's going to be capable of doing. I think it's important to remember, like, I'm not going to sit here and try to rain on the Marvin Mims parade. I know there's a lot of fans out there who love Marvin and who already bought his jersey and things like that after the glimpses we got last year. But keep in mind, like, this guy was a late second round pick. It's not a guaranteed hit in the NFL draft. And that's not to diminish the fact that he was taken in the second round because it was the later portion. But what I'm saying is that he's kind of getting treated as though he was a first round pick, like a late first round pick in terms of fans' expectations. Like, he's just going to kind of slide in to a starting role and immediately become one of the go-to featured players in the offense. Like, he really had to earn that this offseason, and it doesn't appear as though that happened. Now, could I be sitting here with egg on my face after the first game? Marvin Mims goes out there as a starting wide receiver and is out there with Courtland Sutton or whoever it may be, Tim Patrick. Side note, Cody, I wonder if Tim's going to get that first start of the season, just so that, that'd be a cool moment. I know Sean Payton, those things matter to him in terms of guys getting starts under their belt. But Marvin, I'm with you. I'm very confused as far as what his role is going to be. What does this coaching staff think of him? We haven't heard hardly squat about him at training camp. Like, I don't know what is going on there.
No, I don't either. And look, the hopeful, best case scenario, hopefully they're just trying to hide him, right? But I mean, it is worth documenting. I mentioned it here a little bit ago that, he has had some struggles. He's had some rough days during training camp. Is that an indication? Maybe not. Like, and especially with the emergence of Devon Bailey. Look, Sean Payton has made it very clear he likes the size of the Broncos wide receiver room. But Denver's got to be creative to a point. Like, let's say Marvin isn't going to be featured as heavily to start, right? But let's say that, hey, Marvin's going to have a role here on offense. He's going to have a little bit more of a role than he had last year. But you can't make it to where every time Marvin Mims comes in, okay, they're going deep. Okay, they're going to run the end around. They're going to run the jet sweep. They're going to do all this stuff that they tried to do with him last year. That would be a step backward, in my opinion. But Marvin has to contribute as a wide receiver this year. I'm very curious to see how it plays out here going forth. And let's touch on it here as well. The running back pecking order seems like it's also aligned. Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, easy locks right now. And it seems like Audric Estime is going to be that third back, especially what he can offer in the pass protection side of things. A lot of good tape from him. Your quick thoughts on that here as we maybe show up this offensive position battle extraordinaire that we're going to see finalized next week.
Yeah, you don't want to see Audric Estime coming with a full head of steam at you downfield running the ball. And I don't think if you're blitzing defensive back that you want that guy to be facing you off in a Oklahoma type of drill there, where you're going one-on-one. So he is an imposing physical player. I thought a bounce back game against the Packers, even though he wasn't quite as impressive as a runner. You love to see the stuff as a pass protector. That'll be huge for him. And I agree with you. The only factor that may throw a little bit of a wrench into that running back position is Tyler Beatty. Cannot wait to see him play in this final preseason game against the Cardinals.
No, 100%. We'll see if he gets to start. We'll see. I imagine if Samaje Perine ends up playing in this game, that's going to be a big telling sign that, hey, he is competing for a roster spot. But Beatty has scored in every preseason game so far this year. He's looked good, and we're on the Tyler Beatty train as the train keeps rolling here throughout the rest of the NFL preseason. What about the defensive side of the ball, though? Is the cornerback two battle locked up here between Damari Mathis and Riley Moss. What about safety? Is there a new guy who's pushed maybe JL Skinner out of the way? We'll tell you why we think that is the case here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. And look, I love going to live events. Some of my best memories, going to concerts, going to games, taking my kids to go see our favorite teams play in person. And if you've ever attended events in the past, you want to take the guesswork out of getting tickets, out of figuring out where you're going to sit. Well, Game Time has a brand new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. And Game Time Picks filters out all that fluff to show you only the incredible deals on the great seats so that you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets or event tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app and create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The quarterback battle is over, and other positions across the roster seem to be getting ironed out in terms of the starting lineup for the Denver Broncos. Defensively, we have some thoughts on cornerback Riley Moss. Has he locked that up? Could a sleeper be taking JL Skinner's reps at safety? And what else is going on the defensive side of the ball here as we get to the final preseason game for the Denver Broncos? We're going to break that all down, but want to say thank you to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you so much. And you know, your boys, Cody and to be here for you every single day throughout the preseason, roster cuts, the regular season. You get a brand new episode every single day of Locked On Broncos. So hit subscribe so that you don't miss a single piece of Denver Broncos news, content, coverage, and more. And for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL for everything that's going on around the league outside of Denver. Cody, let's talk about the defensive side of the ball. I know we broke down quite a bit of these things after the preseason game, but the dust has settled a little bit. Had a chance to go back and watch through some of the tape or the rewatch of the game broadcast, things like that, listening to kind of the tea leaves that get dropped during the broadcast, which is always interesting. It feels like this team is very solidified as we start off again, the cornerback discussion, very, very important position. It feels like the team is pretty solidified with Riley Moss. What's your take there as far as him versus Damari Mathis for that starting cornerback spot?
Yeah, this one's a very interesting one. And look, I think, Riley, 2 consecutive starts in the NFL preseason. Granted, the first game he did start, and Damari Mathis also started that game with Pat Surtain out. Part of me is wondering, are they going to let it ride out yet another week here going into this third and final preseason game where the starters aren't expected to play? Like, do they have clarity at that position going into Sunday's game? Maybe, right? We don't have to go into Sunday's game wondering, okay, hey, who's going to be the Broncos starting quarterback for week 1 against Seattle? We know that. Cornerback 2 is probably the most intriguing one right now. So if I had to give maybe an early guess here, because I also liked what I saw from Damari Mathis in the game against the Green Bay Packers. There was one play where the running back bounced it outside. Damari did a really good job right there coming up and run support. Got to talk to Pat Surtain after practice following Wednesday where, he highlighted, you look at Riley, he's very athletic, very quick, good footworks, the ability, fluid hips, the ability to open up and make plays there. He talked about Damari Mathis, how he's physical. He loves to engage in contact at the line of scrimmage. Also is athletic, has fluid hips, good footwork, good technique. So part of me is wondering, is this going to drag out here into this final preseason game? I will be honest with you. I think it should. I don't kind of in a sense like you want to be sure, right? Going to the regular season, you want to be sure both of these guys are going to play. But, a guy who did return to practice who was in this consideration earlier, Levi Wallace was back at practice. That might change things a little bit. He might have to play in this game. So do the Broncos make that decision earlier that, hey, it is going to be Riley Moss. Damari's going to be the third cornerback. And then, hey, we'll see if Levi Wallace will compete for a roster spot. So much to be made of this. I don't know how it's going to go, but my personal opinion, Sayre, I think Riley and Damari should get this one game to start it here for the Broncos and determine it after this game.
I agree. And then hopefully we do get to see Levi Wallace play in this game unless he's guaranteed a roster spot, which frankly would kind of surprise me a little bit. Not because he's not a good player, but I think he's the type of guy that you bring in for roster competition during training camp. It wasn't like he signed like a big money deal with a lot of guarantees. He signed the type of contract that you got to go out there and earn it. So I do hope we get to see him play. And sticking with the secondary a little bit, the safety position, to me, I don't know that, Cody, I would say I think beyond the top three solidified right now, because I've been impressed by Keidron Smith, just as a lot of other people in Broncos country have been. But there's also, you're kind of balancing this excitement over JL Skinner. What a lot of people liked him in the pre-draft process last year. To me, the top three is set. Brandon Jones, PJ Locke, and then Devin Key. Those guys are making the team. But beyond that, I think there may be a little bit of a battle going on here for a fourth and potentially final safety spot.
And yeah, and look, I agree with you there. And the reason is Keidron Smith has made plays in the preseason. He's had an interception in the last 2 games. He's had various tackles on special teams. JL Skinner's had a few tackles here and there. But the one thing I would say is when it comes to like standing out, the eye test, who's making plays, it's been Keidron Smith in comparison to JL Skinner. And who have we noticed a little bit more on special teams? It's been Keidron Smith. So maybe this is a very important week here for JL Skinner as well, because he had opportunities here, obviously, with them releasing Caden Stearns. You talk about the injuries and everything that's going on with that position group that we talked about having really the big question mark here with Brandon Jones set to return here. And like Devin Key has surpassed JL Skinner because JL Skinner was getting those first opportunities next to PJ Locke. And all of a sudden, Key has now emerged as that primary guy. And now you have a young guy here in Keidron Smith who's also been making plays. He's been stacking, has had some good practices where he has stood out. You just simply haven't seen enough plays being made by JL Skinner. And that doesn't mean that he's not going to be on the roster and that, they're going to cut him. It just means that I think Keidron Smith has passed him up on the depth chart right now.
Yeah, and it could mean that he's not on the roster ultimately. It depends on the gymnastics they do elsewhere, right? I mean, yes, they could keep 5 safeties, but if you keep 5 safeties, does that mean you're only keeping 4 edge guys? And who gets cut in that instance, or defensive line, or even all the way back to the offensive side of the ball? It could impact everything. So going to be really interesting to see what gets prioritized, because JL Skinner kind of does fit the sort of archetype that you're looking for with that new kickoff format. He's the type of guy that can really excel out there in that format as a big, fast, athletic player to help you make tackles and win the field position battle in this all new era of the NFL, I suppose. As far as the inside linebacker position, Cody, to me, I mean, he's brothers from another, right? Cody Barton. I think he's the guy next to Alex Singleton. He looks like he's playing fast and confident out there. To me, I don't know that we need to see more from him in this final preseason game, but I love Justin Strnad and Jonas Griffith on special teams, even if they don't end up playing on, in the starting defense early this year.
Yeah, no, I agree. And look, I think all signs have pointed to Cody Barton kind of running away with that position battle. Jonas Griffith, just barely over a year removed from the HDL injury. He's going to play a pivotal role on special teams. I personally liked what I saw from Justin Strnad and Jonas Griffith together at inside linebacker in that second preseason game against the Packers this past Sunday. You mentioned it, the impact that these guys are going to have. They're going to play a lot of special teams. Cody Barton's going to play some special teams from time to time. You're going to see that. But I think that position has kind of defined itself already. I don't know if they're going to carry 5, though. I don't think they're going to carry 5 onto the active roster. And certainly, we talked about it in yesterday's Locked On Broncos. What's the prognosis? What's going to happen with, Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson? I mean, Sean Payton, all signs seem to him keeping 3 quarterbacks on the active roster. So now you have to essentially take away a number or a player at that position. Now, if there was only 2 QBs, I'd say, hey, Lavelle Bailey, you're the 5th inside linebacker. If it's 3 the way that we feel it is, I think it's going to be 4. And obviously Justin Strnad, Jonas Griffith, you'll bring Lavelle Bailey back onto the practice squad. That seems to be the plan or the optic standpoint from that position right now. I feel better about inside linebacker right now than I did maybe 3 or 4 months ago, which I feel like we can say we looked at all these other positions. There seems to be a lot of credence to the fact that, hey, Denver has some young players behind the starters that make it a little bit exciting to see maybe how this all plays out down the road. So we'll continue to monitor that here. But in terms of some other updates in terms of practice, there are players who are fighting for positions here on this team, and a couple of them returned to practice after being shelved with injuries. We mentioned Levi Wallace. Well, Devon Vele, rookie sensation, returned to practice on Wednesday. What did we see from him? Does he have to prove himself this week for a roster spot? We'll dive deeper into that and tell you why we think he's already got a spot secure on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
Today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you today. Now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. So go check out FanDuel right now. Maybe you're like a lot of others in Broncos country. You want to smash the over on those 5.5 wins this year, or maybe after seeing Bo Nix named the starting quarterback, you want to lay some odds on him being the rookie of the year offensively in the NFL. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook.
Devon Vele has secured a spot on the wide receiver rotation, at least in our opinion, based on what he's done and the praise that he's drawn from teammates on the defensive side of the ball and also from Sean Payton as well. Maybe a little bit of a growing connection with Bo Nix, who has now been named the starting quarterback. We'll highlight several players who returned from injuries to practice on Wednesday. We'll monitor, obviously, going into Thursday's practice here on today's show. Thanks to all the everydayers and first listeners here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. Thank you for making the show exactly what it is. We appreciate you so much for tuning in on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Let's get into this conversation here. Injury side of things. Good news to see guys returning back from injuries. I think more importantly, Sayre, good news to see not so many Broncos on the injury report throughout the entire training camp process or losing guys for the season in training camp the way that we have seen in years past. We did see Devon Vele return to practice after he left Thursday last week, didn't appear Friday. We didn't even see him in Sunday's game. Saw him back on the field for the first time on Wednesday. Looked like he was moving well. Continued to monitor that. Art Green back from concussion protocol. Levi Wallace back from the hamstring injury. And Brandon Jones back from the hamstring injury as well. That's a good sign right there. The only guy that was on the side field, Drew Sanders, working his way back from Achilles. Delarian Turner-Yell working his way back from an ACL. And Calvin Throckmorton appeared there briefly before returning to the field. So not sure we should read anything into that. But Denver's healthy right now, and it's good because now you can get clarity on maybe certain positions and players going into the third and final week of the preseason.
Give me all the wide receivers in this third preseason game, Cody. It's been, we've seen quite a bit of Lucas Kroll. We've seen a little bit of Greg Dulcich in the passing game. We've seen quite a bit of the running backs coming out of the backfield. Tyler Beatty caught a touchdown last week. Jaleel McLaughlin's had a couple of nice catch and runs. I want to see this wide receiver position go bonkers in the third preseason game. I want to see these guys getting targets. I want to see them getting open, making plays downfield, or at least getting opportunities to do so, because we need to see Devon go out and do this again in a preseason. We need to see Troy Franklin out there, man. I know that he's gotten open a couple of times. It's not that he's just not getting the ball because the Broncos are trying to hide him for anything. They're not going to try to sneak Troy Franklin to the practice squad, in my opinion. I don't think that's possible. Imagine sending Troy Franklin to waivers and in a worst case scenario, the Chiefs pick him up, so why would you do that to yourself when you love the guy? You said you have a second round grade on him. I want to see the wide receivers go out in this preseason and have some fun, make their cases for the roster. We've talked ad nauseum about Jalen Virgil at this point, and there's other guys that are certainly in line to make some plays, but this has to be a confidence building game for those rookies, because I think Devon Vele is going to play week 1 against Seattle. And I think that this might be your last opportunity to get a clean in-game evaluation on Troy Franklin for quite some time, because to me, Cody, and you can disagree with me on this, if feel free, but I feel like Troy is kind of one of those guys that at mid-season or roughly around mid-season, he could kind of be like a quote-unquote trade acquisition for you. Somebody that give him a little bit of extra time on task during practice. You let him kind of grow in the film room and gain a little bit of confidence. To me, then at mid-season point, he could come in and really impact your offense potentially. Not that you're just putting him on ice for the sake of it, but ultimately I say that to vamp off what you said about Devon Vele back at practice. I'm excited for this final preseason game to see these receivers play.
Yeah, and I think you're going to see a lot of those guys, the little Jordan Humphreys. You're going to see, I think, Troy Franklin a lot more this week. Jalen Virgil, you're going to see these guys play as they look to try to figure out. Michael Bandy might be the MVP of this upcoming game. Just saying, keep an eye on it. The Bandy connection, is running strong here in Denver. If not, he'll find his way back to the practice squad. But I like what you said there about Troy Franklin, and there's a point to it because we look at the last couple of years where the Broncos have managed their roster, right? Guys on the 53 who were players last year that essentially redshirted. J.L. Skinner, one of those guys. Alex Forsythe. The Broncos, and I've been firm on my stance here of saying this, the Broncos right now do not need Troy Franklin to be a number one, a number two, a number three, heck, even I think a number four wide receiver right now. They don't need him. Now, if he can get to that point where he can be, that's great. More options, right? Troy's going to cut his teeth a little bit on special teams, but I would say in the regular season, he will primarily be a game day inactive. He'll redshirt a little bit more this year. And I think you're going to see a little bit of a jump from him going into 2025. Not a bad thing. Best case scenario, exactly what you pointed out right there, saying, hey, maybe he does stack it in practice. He gets better. Now he gets a regular season look. Maybe he flips it on as a gamer here. Maybe he's got more confidence. He's doing this really well. Or there's an injury, so to speak. Well, now you throw him in and, hey, all that preparation has paid off. Now he's ready. He can go out there and do some of the things he was doing and maybe, stack on that connection he already has with Bo Nix at the quarterback position. So I think there's a lot of, I would say, realism to what you had mentioned there as we continue to see that kind of pan out here. Now, as it pertains to Levi Wallace, we kind of talked about him earlier. Art Green, I would at this point keep Art Green over Levi Wallace. Now, not to say that, Levi Wallace can't play. I thought Levi Wallace, before he got injured, I thought he's having a great training camp. I was starting to think to myself, okay, hey, maybe he's going to start, or at least he's going to rotate in on certain situations here for Denver because they were moving him inside and outside in terms of that positional versatility. Now it's like, all right, like if you need veteran depth that bad, like I think Denver is fully confident in Pat Surtain, Damari Mathis, and Riley Moss in no particular order, and Jaquan McMillan as their top four corners. Okay, so what does your fifth look like? Now you're factoring in Chris Abrams-Drain as the fifth guy here. So Levi Wallace will essentially be that sixth guy. And if you keep Tremont Smith, maybe seventh between 6 and 7, those two guys in those positions, not in any particular order at the 6 or the 7 spot. That makes it very, very interesting here. And I think also because he went unsigned so late into free agency before training camp even happened, I think if the Broncos wanted to release a guy like Levi Wallace, because he's a veteran, they could bring him right back onto the practice squad. He's not going to have to clear any waivers. You have an easy path to be able to do that while keeping a veteran guy on your roster. I think that's how it's going to play out here at corner.
I agree. I think we're going to see the Broncos maximize their opportunities to add those veterans to the practice squad. It changes every year now. So as we get closer to roster cuts, I'll go research exactly, unless somebody in the comments knows. I think it's 4 or 6 vested veterans that you can have on your practice squad at this point. So I think the Broncos take full advantage of that. And why wouldn't you? When you've got guys like Levi Wallace who could help, little Jordan Humphrey who could help on game days, and that would allow you to stack your 53-man roster with guys that you may want to redshirt, guys that you may not want to put on injured reserve, those types of things. So it's just very helpful. And Sean Payton did a great job manipulating that last year with the way that they operated in the front office, of course, as well. But to me, Cody, that final cornerback position, is it going to come down to who right now, if Jaquan McMillan goes down, God forbid that would happen, right? But if Jaquan goes down, who's the next guy there? Because that could be an underrated storyline to follow. As I know you've mentioned, like Reese Taylor has had a good offseason here. I think that could be something as we look at potential guys to like steal a roster spot here. We haven't really talked a lot about who's going to be that second nickel guy in line, or do any of these other out, like is Damari cross training there still? Riley? I mean, who is it in that backup nickel spot? Because that could end up being a huge factor here in about a week.
Well, I like what you mentioned about Reese Taylor's had a tremendous training camp preseason. I think he'll be a practice squad player initially. I don't think they'll bring him on the 53 just because they're going to have more pressing needs in terms of numbers and guys at other positions. I will say this, though, like in the event, let's say there were an injury to Jaquan, I think Riley Moss would slide to the nickel and he'd put Damari on the outside there. That would probably be the first primary look. Certainly, I think Damari could play inside the nickel and Riley could still play on the outside, but I think they'd probably try to match that up a little different there. So I think you would probably see a better fit there with Riley in the nickel versus Damari being there, but both guys can play it. Both guys have been training up at it. But I think if you're going to go with your active regular season roster, certainly that's the case. Or, a guy like Levi Wallace, who's been playing there as well. Like maybe that's the argument for him staying on the roster at this point and not getting cut or released and then signing back onto the practice squad. A lot of gymnastics are going to be played here in the next week or so, Sayre. And obviously with roster cuts looming, Broncos Country, Sayre, myself will have you covered every step of the way. I'm at practice every day. So any updates that we get from practice as we now get to our normal reporting guidelines where we can't post anything or share anything on social media until after practice concludes. We are back at that point. But if you want up-to-date information, you want it real time, quick, Locked On Broncos is the place to be. For your second listen of the day, make sure you go check out the Locked On NFL podcast, wherever you get your podcast, or available on YouTube to see what's going on around the National Football League. The Packers backup quarterback situation, certainly a question mark in the eyes of Peter Bukowski. What's going on with the Minnesota Vikings? Luke Brown of Locked On Vikings has you covered. Locked On NFL covers you with those biggest stories and much more. Sayre Bedinger, myself, will be back tomorrow to update you as the Broncos get one step closer to their preseason finale. Do we get any more roster clarity? You'll find out on tomorrow's episode of the show.